It is an absolute bloodbath on two continents right now, and Meghan Markle is watching her carefully constructed empire come crashing down around her in spectacular fashion. The woman who once had Hollywood eating out of the palm of her hand, who commanded millions in Netflix deals and Spotify contracts, who was welcomed into American celebrity circles like returning royalty, is now finding herself increasingly isolated, exposed, and facing something she clearly never anticipated. The United Kingdom, the very country she fled with such dramatic flair, is reportedly planning what insiders are calling a brutal intervention, and the timing could not be more devastating. Because here is the thing, folks, America is not rushing to her defense anymore. The tide has turned so dramatically, so completely, that even her most ardent supporters are struggling to find excuses. For years, Meghan has operated under the assumption that she had two distinct audiences: the British public, who she dismissed as racist and hostile, and the American public, who she expected would embrace her as a feminist icon, a civil rights champion, a woman who bravely escaped a toxic institution. That calculation worked beautifully for a while. The Oprah interview was a masterclass in controlling the narrative. The Netflix documentary allowed her to present her version of events without meaningful challenge. American media largely treated her claims with the kind of reverence usually reserved for actual documented facts. But something has fundamentally shifted in the past several months, and the cracks in her carefully maintained facade are now impossible to ignore. Sources close to the situation are painting a picture that should terrify anyone in her position. One insider put it bluntly: she has burned through the goodwill at an astonishing rate, and there is no reserve left to draw from. Another industry figure was even more direct, stating that the American public has finally caught on to what the British public knew all along. And they are absolutely right. The evidence is everywhere you look. Her podcast was canceled after one season despite a reported $25 million deal. Her Netflix content has underperformed relative to its massive budget. Her children's book flopped. Her lifestyle brand faces skepticism before it even launches. Let that sink in for a moment. This is a woman who had every advantage imaginable: royal connections, celebrity status, media training, unlimited resources, and she has managed to squander nearly all of it. The polling data coming out of America tells a story that must keep her up at night. Her favorability ratings have plummeted to levels that rival the most disliked public figures in the country. She is now underwater with virtually every demographic that once championed her cause. Young women, progressive voters, entertainment industry professionals, these were supposed to be her base, her unshakable foundation of support, and they are abandoning her in droves. The transformation has been so complete, so undeniable, that even sympathetic media outlets are struggling to maintain their previous tone of uncritical adulation. But the collapse of her American support is only half of this devastating equation, and what the United Kingdom is reportedly planning in response is nothing short of extraordinary. The rumblings coming out of London are unlike anything we have heard since Meghan and Harry first announced their departure from royal life. Sources with direct knowledge of palace operations are describing what can only be characterized as a coordinated and deliberate campaign to set the record straight, to finally address the mountain of allegations, accusations, and insinuations that Meghan has lobbed at the institution for years without meaningful pushback. And folks, the timing is absolutely surgical. The British establishment has apparently been watching and waiting, allowing Meghan to continue her public relations offensive, carefully documenting every claim, every inconsistency, every provable falsehood. Now, with her American support evaporating and her credibility in freefall, they are reportedly preparing to strike. One palace insider described the mood as "we are done being the punching bag." Another source familiar with the discussions used even more colorful language, stating that the gloves are coming off and there will be receipts. Allow me to translate what this actually means in practical terms. For years, the royal family has operated under a strict policy of never complain, never explain. They absorbed Meghan's accusations about racism in the institution, about lack of mental health support, about jealousy over her popularity, about deliberate media leaking. They said almost nothing while she gave interview after interview, appeared on podcast after podcast, produced documentary after documentary, all presenting her narrative as uncontested truth. That era of restraint appears to be ending. The intervention reportedly being planned operates on multiple fronts simultaneously. Legal teams are said to be compiling detailed timelines that directly contradict specific claims Meghan has made publicly. Communications professionals are preparing carefully worded statements that will challenge her version of events without appearing petty or vindictive. Perhaps most devastatingly, sources suggest that former staff members who signed non-disclosure agreements may be released from those obligations in specific targeted circumstances. The implications of that last point cannot be overstated. There are reportedly dozens of people who worked directly with Meghan during her time as a working royal, people who witnessed her behavior firsthand, who have remained silent due to legal constraints. If those constraints are lifted, the flood of first-hand accounts could be absolutely overwhelming. What makes this intervention particularly brutal is its calculated patience. The British establishment could have responded immediately to the Oprah interview. They could have pushed back aggressively after the Netflix documentary. They chose not to. Instead, they allowed Meghan to continue building her narrative, confident that eventually the contradictions would become too numerous to ignore, that her credibility would erode naturally, that the American public would reach their own conclusions without needing to be told. That gamble appears to have paid off spectacularly. By waiting until her support had already collapsed, any intervention now looks less like a bitter attack and more like a simple correction of the record. Let us be brutally honest about what this means for Meghan's future. She has built her entire post-royal identity on being the victim, the truth teller who escaped a corrupt institution, the woman who was silenced and is finally speaking her truth. If that narrative is systematically dismantled with documentation and witness testimony, what exactly does she have left? But the planned British intervention is not happening in isolation, and what American power players are simultaneously doing to distance themselves from her is equally devastating. Hollywood has noticed what is happening, and the response has been swift, silent, and absolutely brutal in its efficiency. The entertainment industry operates on relationships, on reputation, on the perception that associating with someone will enhance rather than damage your own brand. For years, Meghan benefited from the halo effect of her royal connection and her carefully cultivated image as a progressive champion. Studio executives wanted to be seen with her. A-list celebrities posed for photographs at her events. Power brokers took her calls and treated her pitches with serious consideration. That era has definitively ended, and the evidence is impossible to miss if you know where to look. Sources within the entertainment industry are describing a phenomenon that one executive called the quiet fade. This is Hollywood's preferred method of severing ties without creating public drama. You stop returning phone calls quite as quickly. Meetings get rescheduled, and then rescheduled again. Projects that were supposedly moving forward somehow never quite reached the next phase. One insider was particularly blunt, stating nobody wants to be the last person standing next to her when this whole thing collapses completely. Another industry veteran described it even more colorfully, noting that she has become radioactive and everyone is calculating their escape velocity. The talent agencies, management companies, and public relations firms that once competed for her business are now reportedly maintaining careful distance. Word on the street is that her representation has been quietly advising her to lower her profile, to stop giving interviews, to let the current storm pass before attempting any major launches. The fact that she has apparently ignored this advice tells you everything you need to know about her current state of mind. She seems genuinely incapable of stepping back from the spotlight, even when that spotlight has become distinctly unflattering. The celebrity friendships that were once paraded before cameras have notably cooled. Where are the Clooneys now? When was the last time Serena Williams made a public display of their supposedly close relationship? The A-list connections that Meghan leveraged so effectively during her royal courtship have largely evaporated, and the silence from that quarter is absolutely deafening. These are people who understand reputation management at the highest level, and their calculated distance tells you exactly how they assess her current value. Perhaps most damaging is the response from the philanthropic community that Meghan has tried so desperately to court. Major charitable organizations are reportedly declining partnership opportunities. Foundation executives are expressing private skepticism about her commitment and follow-through. One nonprofit leader was devastating in their assessment, suggesting that she seems more interested in the photo opportunity than the actual work. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who has positioned herself as a humanitarian warrior, who constantly invokes causes and communities as justification for her platform, is being rejected by the very organizations that should be her natural allies, and the financial implications of this professional exile are becoming impossible to ignore. Which brings us to an even more troubling question. The money situation is reportedly causing serious strain inside the Montecito mansion. And folks, the numbers simply do not add up anymore. When Harry and Meghan first departed royal life, they secured what appeared to be generational wealth. The Netflix deal was reportedly worth around $100 million. The Spotify arrangement was valued at approximately $25 million. Book deals, speaking engagements, and various other ventures suggested they would never need to worry about finances again. But here is what the breathless coverage of those initial deals consistently failed to mention. Those massive numbers were not guaranteed payments. They were contingent on delivery, on performance, on actually producing content that justified the investment. The Spotify disaster is the most obvious example of how spectacularly those expectations have gone unmet. $25 million for a podcast deal, and what did they actually deliver? One season of Archetypes before the entire arrangement was terminated. Executives at the streaming giant were reportedly furious at the lack of output relative to the massive advance they had provided. One insider described it as the most expensive podcast that almost never was. The cancellation was not just a business decision, it was a public humiliation that signaled to the entire industry exactly how that partnership had gone. Netflix presents an equally troubling picture. While the Harry and Meghan documentary generated initial viewership, subsequent projects have failed to capture meaningful attention. The Polo documentary that seemed to baffle everyone who reviewed it. The lifestyle content that feels distinctly disconnected from how actual people live. Reports suggest that Netflix executives are increasingly skeptical about the return on their massive investment, and that future projects face much more rigorous scrutiny than the initial offerings received. According to those familiar with the situation, the blank check era is definitively over. The overhead they are carrying is absolutely staggering. The Montecito estate reportedly costs around $300,000 per year in basic maintenance alone. The security costs, which they complain bitterly about losing royal coverage for, are estimated at over $2 million annually. Staff salaries, travel expenses, wardrobe costs for public appearances, all of this adds up to a burn rate that requires constant incoming revenue just to maintain their current lifestyle. Let us be brutally honest about what this means practically. They are spending at a rate that assumes continued massive deals, but those deals are not materializing. Industry insiders suggest that their asking prices for new projects have been repeatedly rejected. One source claimed that proposals that would have generated serious interest 3 years ago are now being declined without serious consideration. The leverage has shifted entirely, and the market has spoken clearly about their current value. But the financial pressure is creating internal tensions that are spilling into public view, and what sources are revealing about the dynamic inside that marriage is genuinely shocking. The cracks in the Sussex partnership have become impossible to ignore, and insiders are painting a picture of a relationship under tremendous strain. For years, Harry and Meghan have presented a united front, appearing at events together, issuing joint statements, carefully coordinating their public image to suggest perfect harmony. But those close to the situation are telling a very different story, one of fundamental disagreements about strategy, about public appearances, about the very direction their post-royal life should take. And folks, the tension is apparently reaching a breaking point. Sources describe Harry as increasingly isolated and uncertain about the path they have chosen. One insider was particularly blunt, stating that he looks like a man who is finally realizing what he gave up and what he got in return. Another person familiar with the situation suggested that the reality of his estrangement from his family, particularly from his father and brother, weighs on him heavily in private, even as he maintains the public position that leaving was absolutely necessary. The cognitive dissonance between what he says publicly and what he apparently feels privately is reportedly causing significant psychological strain. Meghan, by contrast, is described by sources as doubling down on her current approach, convinced that the only way forward is to maintain exactly the strategy that has brought them to this point. Those close to the couple say that she genuinely does not understand why her American popularity has collapsed so dramatically. She reportedly believes that increased visibility, more interviews, more content, more public appearances will eventually turn the tide back in her favor. The disconnect from reality that this represents is genuinely remarkable. Every piece of evidence suggests that overexposure has been her problem, not the solution, yet she apparently cannot or will not adjust course. The staff departures we have witnessed over the past several years take on new significance in this context. When your most loyal employees, people who relocated their families across oceans to work for you, people who stuck with you through controversy after controversy, start heading for the exits, it tells you something profound about the internal atmosphere. One former associate described the environment as walking on eggshells that somehow keep multiplying. Another was even more direct, suggesting that the gap between the public image and the private reality eventually becomes too much for anyone with self-respect to tolerate. What makes this particularly devastating is the contrast with Harry's previous life. Say what you will about the royal institution, and there is certainly plenty to criticize, but Harry had genuine purpose, genuine relationships, genuine connection to something larger than himself. His military service, his charitable work, his role within the family, all of this provided meaning and structure. Now he appears adrift, cut off from virtually everyone he knew before meeting Meghan, dependent entirely on her judgment about how they should proceed. Let that sink in for a moment. A prince of the realm, reduced to what observers describe as a supporting player in his own life. But the internal dysfunction is only part of this story, because the public exposure of Meghan's past behavior is accelerating in ways that should terrify her. The receipts are coming out, and they are devastating. For years, Meghan has carefully controlled her narrative, presenting herself as someone who rose from humble beginnings, faced discrimination and obstacles, and ultimately triumphed through talent and determination. It is a compelling story. It is also, according to accumulating evidence, substantially untrue in key respects. Former classmates, former colleagues, former associates are increasingly willing to speak on the record, and the portrait they are painting contradicts almost everything she has claimed about her pre-royal life. Let us start with the humble beginnings narrative that has been so central to her public image. Meghan has repeatedly emphasized her supposedly middle-class upbringing, positioning herself as someone who understands ordinary struggle. But reports and testimony from people who knew her during those years tell a different story. She attended one of of the most exclusive private schools in Los Angeles. Her father worked in television production, providing connections that directly advanced her early career. The carefully crafted image of a self-made woman fighting her way up from nothing simply does not match the documented reality. The treatment of family members is another area where the official narrative is crumbling. Meghan has positioned herself as someone victimized by a difficult family situation, particularly regarding her father Thomas Markle. But insiders and observers are increasingly pointing out the pattern that predates her relationship with Harry. Her relationship with her father deteriorated dramatically only after she achieved the fame she sought. The half-siblings she has dismissed as virtual strangers were apparently much more present in her life than she has acknowledged. One person familiar with the family dynamics put it succinctly: "The estrangements always seem to benefit her story in the moment." Former colleagues from her acting days are also speaking up with increasing frequency. The portrait they paint is of someone relentlessly focused on advancement, willing to abandon relationships that no longer served her purposes, and surprisingly calculating beneath the warm public persona. Word on the street in Hollywood circles is that people who knew her before she became famous are uniformly unsurprised by how things have unfolded. One former colleague allegedly said they saw exactly this trajectory coming from the early days. The palace staff revelations are perhaps the most damaging of all. Multiple former employees have reportedly described behavior that directly contradicts Meghan's self-presentation as a kind, compassionate, misunderstood figure. The bullying allegations that emerged before the wedding have never been satisfactorily addressed. The extraordinary turnover in her personal staff, far exceeding normal rates for royal households, suggests a pattern that cannot be explained by institutional racism or media persecution. As one former insider put it, there is a reason why everyone leaves, and the exposure is only intensifying as more people feel emboldened to speak, which brings us to the legal vulnerabilities that are now becoming apparent. The legal landscape is shifting dramatically, and Meghan may have finally overplayed her hand in ways that create genuine liability. For years, she has made specific factual claims in interviews, documentaries, and public statements. Many of those claims involved identifiable individuals and institutions. And here is the thing about public statements, folks. They can form the basis for defamation actions if they are provably false and cause genuine harm. The window for legal consequences that once seemed closed may be opening again. Sources with knowledge of legal discussions in the United Kingdom suggest that several parties are actively considering formal action. The individuals she has accused of specific behaviors, the institutions she has characterized in particular ways, the family members she has publicly discussed, all of these represent potential plaintiffs who could seek legal remedy for statements that damage their reputations. One legal expert familiar with British defamation law noted that the burden of proof works differently than in America, and that statements which might be protected speech under American standards could be actionable in British courts. The palace investigation into bullying allegations has reportedly never been formally concluded, and sources suggest that the findings, if ever released, would be deeply damaging to her public image. Allow me to translate what this means practically. There may be documented evidence, gathered through formal investigation, that directly contradicts her characterization of herself as the victim, rather than the perpetrator of hostile workplace behavior. The decision about whether to release that evidence apparently rests with the palace, and the previous reluctance to escalate may be giving way to a new willingness to defend the institution's reputation. The Oprah interview represents particular legal exposure because of the specific factual claims that were made. The allegation about conversations regarding her son's potential skin color, the claims about being denied help when she was suicidal, the suggestions about specific individuals' knowledge and involvement in various situations. All of these were presented as factual recollections, and all of them could potentially be challenged if the individuals involved chose to do so. The fact that they have not yet taken legal action should not be interpreted as an inability to do so. Let us be brutally honest about what legal exposure means for someone in Meghan's position. She has no institutional backing anymore. The royal family's resources are not available to defend her. Her American celebrity connections are evaporating. Her financial position is apparently stretched. Fighting expensive legal battles across multiple jurisdictions would be devastating, even if she ultimately prevailed. And if she did not prevail, the reputational damage would be catastrophic and permanent. But the legal vulnerabilities pale in comparison to the existential threat now facing her entire brand, and the lifestyle venture she has staked everything on is already showing signs of disaster. The lifestyle brand that was supposed to represent Meghan's triumphant reinvention is reportedly in serious trouble before it even launches. After years of failed ventures and canceled deals, this was supposed to be her comeback, her chance to prove that she could succeed on her own terms outside the Hollywood system that has increasingly rejected her. Instead, sources are painting a picture of an undertaking plagued by the same problems that have doomed her previous efforts, and the industry response has been tepid at best. Those familiar with the project describe a fundamental disconnect between what Meghan believes people want from her and what actual market research suggests. She apparently envisions herself as the next Martha Stewart or Gwyneth Paltrow, building a lifestyle empire empire that spans multiple product categories and commands premium prices. But here is the brutal truth that everyone around her seems reluctant to state directly. Those successful lifestyle moguls built their empires on demonstrated expertise and authentic connection with their audiences. Martha Stewart was a legitimate authority on homemaking before she became a brand. Gwyneth Paltrow cultivated her wellness persona over decades. Meghan has no comparable foundation of demonstrated competence in the lifestyle space. The products reportedly in development reveal the scope of the disconnect. High-end home goods, artisanal food products, wellness offerings, all priced at levels that assume a customer base of devoted followers willing to pay premium prices specifically because of her involvement. But who exactly is that customer base at this point? The American consumers who once admired her have largely turned away. The British public never embraced her in the first place. The international markets that might have been accessible through her royal connection are increasingly skeptical. One retail analyst was devastating in their assessment, suggesting that she is building a brand for an audience that no longer exists. The timing could not possibly be worse. Consumer spending is under pressure across the economy. Luxury lifestyle brands are struggling even with established customer bases, launching a new venture that depends entirely on personal brand appeal. At a moment when that personal brand is in free fall, represents either remarkable courage or remarkable delusion. Sources close to the situation suggest it may be the latter. One insider noted that she seems unable to accept that the market has rendered its verdict. Let that sink in for a moment. This woman walked away from a position of genuine influence and global platform, convinced that she could build something bigger and better on her own. Instead, she has systematically destroyed her credibility, alienated her audiences, and depleted the goodwill that could have sustained a genuinely successful post-royal career. The lifestyle brand represents essentially her last chance to prove that her judgment was sound, and all indicators suggest it is heading toward another humiliating failure. And as her American dreams collapse around her, the British intervention is preparing to deliver what could be the final devastating blow. The coordinated nature of what is coming from the United Kingdom represents something genuinely unprecedented in modern royal history. This is not a single disgruntled source speaking to tabloids. This is not palace aides leaking minor embarrassments. According to those familiar with the planning, this is a systematic, multi-pronged effort to permanently dismantle the narrative that Meghan has constructed over the past several years. And the participants include people with first-hand knowledge, documentary evidence, and the credibility to be taken seriously. The former staff members represent the most immediately damaging category of witnesses. These are people who work directly with Meghan, who observed her behavior on a daily basis, who can speak with authority about the gap between her public persona and her private conduct. Sources suggest that many of them have been waiting for this moment, bound by confidentiality agreements but desperate to tell their stories. If those agreements are modified or released, as reports suggest may happen, the flood of testimony could be overwhelming. One person familiar with the situation described it as dozens of people with consistent stories that paint a very different picture. Palace officials and royal household members represent another crucial category. These are individuals who witnessed the discussions she has characterized publicly, who were present for the events she has described, who have documentation that may contradict her claims. The royal family's traditional reluctance to engage in public disputes has apparently reached its limit, and the willingness to provide factual corrections, even if not attributed to specific individuals, represents a significant escalation. Perhaps most damaging is the apparent involvement of credible mainstream journalists, who have been conducting their own investigations. Unlike tabloid reporters whose work can be easily dismissed as biased, these are serious professionals with reputations for accuracy and thoroughness. Their forthcoming reporting will be difficult to characterize as racist attacks or media persecution. One journalist working on this beat suggested that what emerges in the coming months will fundamentally reshape public understanding of who she actually is. The timing is surgical. Waiting until her American support had already collapsed means that the intervention cannot be credibly characterized as the cause of her unpopularity. She did that to herself. What is coming simply provides the documentation and testimony to explain what Americans have already intuited through her own behavior. It is the difference between suspicion and confirmation, and that confirmation will be impossible to spin away. Let us be brutally honest about what all of this means for her future, and it is not pretty. The end game is approaching, and Meghan Markle is running out of options, allies, and time. Everything she built, every relationship she leveraged, every claim she made is now being systematically examined, challenged, and in many cases demolished. The American audience she courted has turned away. The Hollywood establishment that once embraced her has quietly closed its doors. The British intervention is preparing to strip away whatever credibility remains, and inside that Montecito mansion, a marriage that that was supposed to represent liberation and triumph, is reportedly buckling under pressures that may prove insurmountable. The irony is absolutely staggering when you step back and consider it. She had everything: a global platform, a devoted partner willing to sacrifice his family relationships for her, $100 million deals, celebrity connections, the sympathy of millions who believed her story of escape from a cruel institution, and she squandered all of it through overexposure, inconsistency, and what appears to be a fundamental inability to deliver on her promises. The staff members fled, the deals collapsed, the friendships cooled, the public turned, and now the reckoning arrives. Those close to the situation describe someone who still does not fully grasp what has happened. She reportedly believes that one good interview, one successful product launch, one viral moment could turn everything around. The disconnect from reality that this represents would be almost poignant if the consequences were not so entirely self-inflicted. She created this situation through her own choices, her own statements, her own treatment of others, and now she must live with the results. Harry's position is perhaps even more tragic. He gave up everything: his family, his country, his military connections, his purpose, for a life that appears increasingly empty and directionless. The brother he was once close to has reportedly given up on reconciliation. His father, the king, is said to be finished with attempts at rapprochement. The cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends who once surrounded him have largely disappeared from his life. What he has instead is a mansion in California, dwindling resources, and a partner whose judgment has led them from disaster to disaster. The exposure of Meghan Markle is not coming. It has arrived. The United States has indeed turned on her, not because of British propaganda or royal scheming, but because Americans finally saw what was always there. The brutal intervention from the United Kingdom is simply the documentation, the evidence, the testimony that confirms what instinct already suggested. She was never who she claimed to be, and the elaborate construction she built is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Drop your thoughts below. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you will not believe what is coming next.